The forgotten button. Salman pressed the elevator button with his tired hand. The day had been long, filled with endless paperwork and the constant buzz of office chatter. Now, as midnight crept closer, the building felt more like a tomb than a home. The elevator arrived with a metallic groan, the kind of sound that reminded him the machinery inside was far older than it should be. He stepped in, the dim yellow light flickering above him. He pressed the button for the 8th floor, the floor he had always lived on. His finger, however, slipped, or so he thought, and grazed the button marked 9. Salman frowned. His apartment building was only supposed to have 8 floors. That was something every tenant knew, something written in the lease itself. Yet as the elevator doors closed, the faint red glow of the 9 shone steadily alongside the 8. The elevator hummed, climbing upward, floor by floor. Salman tried to laugh it off, muttering, "Maybe it's a broken light." He leaned against the wall, eyes heavy, ready to collapse into bed. But when the elevator jerked to a stop, his body stiffened. The small screen above the doors read 9. The doors slid open with their usual sigh, but instead of the familiar hallway of his building, a different corridor stretched out. It was longer, narrower, and cloaked in shadows. The overhead bulbs were faint, some swinging slightly as if moved by a breeze, though there was no breeze inside. The wallpaper was peeling, stained with watermarks that resembled faces. A chill crept through the doorway, brushing his skin like a cold hand. From somewhere deep in the corridor there came a sound, slow, heavy, a long exhale like someone breathing in the dark. Salman froze. His mind raced. How can there be a 9th floor? He reached for the button panel to close the doors, but his hand trembled too much to find it. His ears strained as the breathing grew clearer, steady, patient, waiting. Then came the first sound of footsteps. One step, then another, deliberate, echoing, getting closer. Salman's throat went dry. His instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to move. And the corridor kept stretching forward, darker and darker, as if inviting him in. The breathing in the dark. The corridor stretched on forever, swallowing every flicker of light. Salman stood frozen inside the elevator, his palm hovering inches from the button panel. His chest rose and fell with quick, shallow breaths, but the sound he heard beyond the door was slower, heavier, almost deliberate. Someone is there, he thought. No, it didn't feel like just someone. It felt like the building itself was breathing. The footsteps returned, 1, 2, then silence. They weren't rushed or clumsy. Whoever or whatever was moving out there had no reason to hurry. It was patient, waiting. Salman's shaking finger finally pressed the close button, but nothing happened. The elevator doors stayed open, the cold air pouring in from that endless hall. His mind screamed at him to look away, but his eyes were fixed on the shadows, straining to make out a shape. And then he saw it, just for an instant. At the far end of the corridor, something shifted. A silhouette, tall and thin, leaning against the wall as if it had been there all along. It didn't move forward, but its head tilted slowly, unnaturally, like a puppet jerked by invisible strings. Salman stumbled back against the rear wall of the elevator, his heartbeat drumming in his ears. He jabbed at the panel again, pressing every button he could. Still nothing. The shadow lifted its head. And then came the sound, not footsteps, Not breathing, something worse. A low groan, deep and guttural, like stone being dragged across stone. It vibrated through the metal floor beneath his feet. His vision blurred with panic. He slammed the close button once more, and this time, mercifully, the doors began to slide shut, but just before they closed completely, he swore he saw the figure lean forward, as if it was rushing toward him. The doors clanged together, sealing him inside. The elevator jerked, descending in silence. When the doors finally opened again, he was back on the 8th floor. His familiar hallway greeted him. Dim lights, peeling paint, the usual smell of dust. Everything was normal. Almost. As Salman stepped out, he noticed his shoes left faint wet prints on the floor, as if he had walked through water, but he hadn't taken a single step into that corridor. The tenant's warning. The next morning, Salman tried to dismiss it all as exhaustion. A man working 12-hour shifts could easily imagine shadows in the dark, right? He repeated that thought again and again as he poured bitter coffee into a chipped mug. Yet the memory lingered, the wet footprints, the sound of that breath, the way the figure's head tilted as though it had noticed him. On his way out for work, he found someone waiting by the elevator. An old man stood there, hunched over a cane, his cloudy eyes staring at the panel of buttons as though memorizing them. Salman had seen him before. He lived on the 6th floor, always quiet, always muttering to himself. The old man's head turned as if he had sensed Salman's approach. "You pressed it, didn't you?" His voice rasped like dry paper. Salman froze. "Pressed what?" "The 9th," he said, tapping his cane softly against the floor. "You went where you weren't supposed to go." A chill worked its way down Salman's spine. "There isn't a 9th floor," he said quickly, forcing a small laugh. "This building only goes up to 8. The old man's lips trembled. Not quite a smile, not quite a frown. "That's what they tell you. That's what the landlord wants you to believe. But the elevator, sometimes it remembers." Salman's throat tightened. "Remembers what?" "The people who never came back. You hear them breathing, don't you? Walking in that hall. That's why you must never press it. Never." His cane struck the floor sharply, as if to punctuate the warning. The elevator doors opened with a ding, and the old man shuffled inside. Before stepping in, he turned his head one last time, his milky eyes locked onto Salman's. "Next time, it won't let you leave." The doors slid shut, leaving Salman in the hallway, his coffee cup trembling in his hand. For the rest of the day, those words gnawed at him. The people who never came back. He tried to drown them out with spreadsheets, phone calls, and endless emails. But when night came and he found himself again standing before the elevator, his finger hovering over the worn buttons, his hand shook with the memory of that warning. And deep inside, despite his fear, something pulled him, a gnawing curiosity, a whisper that seemed to echo from the walls. Come back, come back.
Dreams of the Corridor. That night, sleep did not come easily. Salmon tossed beneath his thin blanket, the hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence. But whenever his eyes drifted shut, he found himself not in his apartment, but standing again in that corridor. The dream was vivid, far too vivid to ignore. The hallway stretched endlessly, the walls damp and breathing as though alive. Each step he took echoed back to him, distorted, as though someone else were following at the exact same pace. His hands brushed against peeling wallpaper that felt damp, soft, like flesh. He woke with a start, sweat clinging to his skin, heart hammering. The dim light of his alarm clock read 3:33 a.m. His throat was parched, but when he reached for the glass of water on his nightstand, he froze. It wasn't the glass. It was the faint smell. A damp, moldy odor lingered in the room, the same one from the dream. Salmon sat up, breathing heavily. He convinced himself it was just his imagination, but when he turned toward his bedroom door, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The door was slightly open. He always locked it before bed. Always. In the dark, he could swear he saw a shadow slide past the crack of the door. Slow, deliberate, as if someone was waiting just beyond it. Enough, he muttered under his breath. He forced himself out of bed, slammed the door shut, and locked it tight. Still, sleep refused to return. Every time he drifted close, the corridor appeared again, drawing him deeper, pulling him closer to the end where that locked door waited. By morning, he looked pale, his eyes sunken. At work, his colleagues barely noticed. Everyone was tired in their own way, but Salmon knew his exhaustion was different. The corridor had followed him into his sleep, and it wasn't letting go. That evening, as he dragged himself home, he felt it again. That faint tug, not just in his mind, but in his body, like invisible strings pulling him back toward the elevator. And when he stood before the panel that night, staring at the row of numbered buttons, the 9 glowed faintly, as though it was waiting for him.
The letter under the door. The following night, Salmon returned home later than usual. He told himself he'd stay at the office to avoid the elevator, to drown his thoughts in paperwork until exhaustion forced him to collapse. But when the office emptied and the lights dimmed, the silence there felt even worse. He couldn't avoid his apartment forever. By the time he reached his floor, the hallway was quiet, heavy with stale air. He unlocked his door, dropped his bag, and tried to shake off the unease. Maybe some tea would help, maybe a shower, anything to push away the dreams. But then he saw it. A folded piece of paper lay on the floor just inside his apartment, slipped under the door while he was gone. No envelope, no stamp, just a thin scrap of yellowed paper, edges frayed as though it had been torn from something much older. He bent down slowly, hands hesitant, and picked it up. There were only 5 words written in black ink, shaky but deliberate. "You can't stay on 8." Beneath the words, there was no signature, only a strange mark, a spiral, drawn in ink, circling tighter and tighter until it ended in a small black dot. Salman stared at it, his pulse racing. He rushed to the door, flung it open, and scanned the hallway. Nothing. The air was still. His neighbors' doors were shut, silent. The corridor was empty. Closing the door again, he locked it twice. His thoughts churned. Who put this here? Was it the old man? Was someone watching me? He sat down on the edge of his bed, the paper trembling in his hand. But the longer he stared at it, the more unsettling it became. The handwriting looked...
Elevator malfunctions. Salman avoided the letter the next morning, stuffing it inside a drawer as if that would bury its message. He left for work earlier than usual, desperate to shake the weight pressing on his chest. All day he tried to convince himself it was nothing more than a prank. Someone in the building, maybe even that old man on the 6th floor, trying to scare him. But by nightfall, the fear returned. He stood in front of the elevator again, staring at the panel. His thumb hovered over the 8. He pressed it firmly, whispering under his breath, "Not 9, not 9." The doors closed, the machine groaned, climbing. 1 floor, 2, 3. Then the light above the doors flickered. Instead of 4, the glowing number shifted to 9. Solomon's stomach dropped. He hadn't touched it. He pressed 8, nothing else. His hand flew to the panel, jabbing the button for his floor, then the door open button. Nothing responded. The buttons lit under his touch, but gave no reaction, as though the elevator had made up its own mind. The hum of machinery grew louder, deeper, vibrating through the walls. The elevator shuddered once, then stopped. Ding! The doors opened. The same corridor waited for him, stretching out in silence, stale air seeping inside. The walls looked darker this time, almost charred, the peeling wallpaper curling like burned paper. A faint dripping sound echoed from somewhere unseen. "No," Salman muttered, slamming the close button again and again. His finger ached from pressing it, but the doors refused to move. And then, just at the edge of the corridor's shadow, something stirred. A shape hunched low to the ground, crawling instead of walking. Its hands slapped wetly against the floor, dragging itself closer with agonizing slowness. Salman's breath came in sharp bursts. "Close, damn it! Close!" Finally, as if obeying him too late, the doors creaked and slid shut, the shape only a few feet away. The elevator jolted, then descended rapidly, shuddering with every floor it passed. When the doors opened again, he stumbled onto the 8th floor, collapsing against the wall, drenched in cold sweat. But the relief was brief. As the elevator doors closed behind him, he saw something that froze his blood. The button for the 9th floor was still glowing red, bright, alive, like it was waiting for him to return. Salman. Every time he shut his eyes, he saw the corridor. Every time he blinked, he imagined the sound of that crawling thing dragging itself closer. By the 3rd night, his nerves were so frayed that he jumped at the creak of his own floorboards. In his desperation, he decided to seek answers. Someone in the building must know the truth. The old man had warned him before, but Salman needed more than riddles. He needed facts. So, he started asking questions. At first, casually, to the grocer who ran the shop downstairs, to the woman who watered plants in the lobby, to the security guard who dozed at the entrance. Most avoided his eyes, brushing him off with quick replies. Never heard of it. This building only has 8 floors. Don't go looking for trouble, sir. But on the 4th attempt, he struck something. An older woman, a longtime tenant who lived on the 2nd floor, lowered her voice when he mentioned the 9th button. "You should not speak of it," she whispered, wringing her hands. Her eyes darted nervously to the elevator at the end of the hall. People have disappeared that way. Salman leaned in. "What do you mean, disappeared?" She swallowed hard. "There was a man years ago. He lived here before you. Everyone said he was troubled, that he wandered the halls at night. One evening, he took the elevator, and it never came back down." Salman frowned. "Never came back?" They searched. The police, the landlord, everyone. But the elevator was gone for 3 days. When it returned, it was empty. The man was never seen again. Her hands trembled as she clutched her shawl tighter. They said he found the floor that isn't supposed to exist. They said he walked down that hall and never returned. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And sometimes at night, tenants heard him calling from inside the walls, calling for help. A cold shiver ran down Salman's spine. He wanted to ask more, but the woman turned away quickly, muttering a prayer under her breath. She refused to speak further. That night, as Salman passed the elevator, he thought he heard something faint behind its closed doors. A voice, hoarse, broken, but unmistakable. It whispered his name. The Whispering Walls. The voice stayed with Salman long after he left the elevator lobby. It wasn't just hearing his name, it was the way it had been spoken. Dry, fragile, as though the throat that carried it no longer belonged to the living. That night, he barricaded his apartment door with a chair, convinced it would help him sleep. But at 2:14 a.m., he woke to a faint sound. Not footsteps, not breathing, whispering. It came from the walls. He pressed his ear against the plaster, his heart hammering. Yes, there it was, faint, scattered, impossible to understand. Dozens of voices all speaking at once, overlapping, like water running through cracked pipes. He stepped back, clutching his chest. "I'm imagining this," he told himself. "It's just in my head." But the whispering grew louder. The voices tangled together, words rising and falling in a strange rhythm, like a chant. He couldn't make out most of it except for a single phrase that repeated again and again, crawling under his skin. "Open the door." Salman staggered back, staring at the locked entrance of his apartment. No, not that door. The words weren't speaking of his apartment. They were speaking of the door at the end of the 9th floor corridor. His mouth went dry. He grabbed his phone, ready to call someone, anyone. But the screen flickered. Lines of static distorted the display, and then his reflection appeared against the black glass. The reflection smiled. He hadn't. Salman dropped his phone, his pulse racing. The whispering in the walls swelled, louder and louder, until it became a low roar pressing against his skull. He clapped his hands over his ears, but the words still slithered inside his head. "Open the door. Open the door." Suddenly, silence. The room grew so quiet he could hear his own heartbeat echoing. He bent down to pick up his phone. The screen was dark now, lifeless. But on the floor beside it, slipped halfway under the bedroom door, lay another piece of paper. Same handwriting, same spiral. This time, the message read, "You are almost ready." By now, Salman no longer felt like a tenant in his own home. He felt like an intruder, tolerated only until something decided otherwise. The whispers, the papers, the glow of the 9th button, they had hollowed out the routine of his days. That night, the elevator didn't wait for him to press a button. The moment the doors shut, the panel lit up on its own. 9. "No!" he hissed, slamming the 8 repeatedly. But the elevator ignored him, groaning upward as though it had already chosen his destination. The familiar ding sounded, and the doors opened. The corridor stretched before him, darker than ever. The light bulbs overhead flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to crawl along the peeling wallpaper. The air was damp, cold, and smelled faintly of rust. This time, the elevator doors didn't close. They remained open, waiting. Salman stepped out, his legs trembling. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to turn back, but his feet carried him forward, each step heavy with dread. The dripping sound returned, echoing from somewhere above, and with every step, the shadows seemed to bend toward him, as though watching. At the far end of the corridor, he saw it. A single door. Unlike the rest of the decayed hallway, this door stood out. It was wooden, old, the surface blackened by burns that traced strange shapes into its grain. Scratches marred the lower half, deep grooves as though someone or something had clawed desperately from the inside. Salman's breath hitched. He reached for the handle, his hand shaking so violently it barely touched the cold brass. It wouldn't turn, locked. From the silence came a sound, a knock, soft, measured, from the other side. Salman staggered back, his pulse roaring in his ears. But then the whispers began again, seeping from the walls, curling into his skull. "Open the door! Open the door!" The handle rattled violently, jerking against the lock. Something on the other side was trying to get out. Salman turned and sprinted, stumbling back toward the elevator. The doors, as if mocking him, began to close just as he reached them. He threw himself forward, barely squeezing inside as the corridor darkened behind him. The last thing he saw before the doors sealed shut was the door handle at the end of the hall, still shaking, as though whatever was trapped inside had noticed him and was waiting.